All right, we start as we normally do by reciting the Mangala Charana praise, and then we shall discuss this beautiful verse together. Om Jnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutan Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Avanchakalpa Turubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivashadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadi Shatarine. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ustitan lepan anamodito dvijay Sakrit smabunje tadapashta kilbisam Evam pravittasya vishuddha chetasas Tadharma evatmaruchi prajayate. Word for word synonyms. Ushchita lepan, the remnants of food. Anumodita, being permitted. Dvijay, by the Vedantis Brahmanas. Sakrit, once upon a time. Sma, in the past. Bunje, took. Tat, by that action. Upasta, eliminated. Kilbisa, all sins. Evam, thus. Pravittasya, being engaged. Vishuddha chetasa, of one whose mind is purified. Tat, that particular. Dharma, nature. Eva, certainly. Atma ruchi, transcendental attraction. Prajayate, was manifested. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Once only, by their permission, I took the remnants of the food, and by doing so, all my sins were eradicated. Engaged, I became purified in heart, and at that time, the very nature of the transcendentalists became attractive to me. Would anyone like to read the purport today?
I can read, Prabhuji.
Yes, please do so, Bhagavati Mataji.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Pure devotion is much infectious. It's in a good sense as infectious diseases. a pure devotee is cleared from all kinds of sins. The personality of Godhead is the purest entity. And unless one is equally pure from the infection of material qualities, one cannot become a pure devotee of the Lord. The Bhakti Vedantas, as above mentioned, were pure devotees, and the boy became infected with their qualities of purity by their association and by eating once the remnants of the foodstuff taken by them. Such remnants may be taken even without permission of the pure devotees. There are sometimes pseudo-devotees, and one should be very much cautious about them. There are many things which hinder one from entering devotional service, but by the association of pure devotees, all these obstacles are removed. The neophyte devotee becomes practically enriched with the transcendental qualities of the pure devotees, which means attractions for the personality of a Godhead's name, fame, qualities, pastime, etc. Infection of the qualities of the pure devotee means to imbibe the taste of pure devotion always in the transcendental activities of the personality of Godhead. These transcendental tastes at once makes all material things distasteful. Therefore, a pure devotee is not at all attracted by material activities. After the elimination of all sins or obstacles on the path of devotional service, one can become attracted, one can have steadiness, one can have perfect taste, one can have transcendental emotion, and last, one can be situated on the plane of loving service of the Lord. All these stages developed by the association of pure devotees, and that is the purport of the stanza. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhagavati Mataji. Hare Krishna. Again, the verse, once only by their permission, I took the remnants of their food, and by doing so, all my sins were at once eradicated. Thus being engaged, I became purified in heart, and at the same time, the very nature of the transcendentalist became attractive to me. So this verse is being spoken by Sri Narada to Vyasadeva. We could recall the situation where Srila Vyasadeva was despondent. His despondency was diagnosed by his spiritual master Sri Narada, and he was instructed to cure his despondency by describing the activities of the Lord and devotional service. And to emphasize to Srila Vyasadeva the supreme position of devotional service and why he's emphasizing devotional service so much, he decides to give a recount of his own personal history. And that's what we've been discussing here. Briefly, Sri Narada is explaining he was the son of a maidservant. During the rainy season, the Bhakti Vedantas, the devotees of the Lord, would congregate and live for a few months in the ashram. And Narada's mother used to take care of the Bhakti Vedantas. And being a little boy, accompanying his mother, he would help his mother. He would serve the Bhakti Vedantas. And in this verse, there's a particular service, and the potency of a service is being described. Just one interesting point about this verse. Not so long ago, every morning in the temple, we will read from the Shishashtakam. Not Shishashtakam, Prabhupada Shikshamrita, sorry. Prabhupada's instructions from his letters. So in one letter, one disciple asked Srila Prabhupada, when we go back to the spiritual world, when we become liberated, will we remember our past lives and our past experiences? And Srila Prabhupada answered, yes. And Prabhupada said, the evidence of that is Sri Narada himself. He is a liberated soul, a pure devotee, liberated. But still, he was able to remember his past life as he recounted in the first canto, chapter 5. So I found that very interesting. And now Srila Prabhupada had cited this evidence. So in citing how he became a devotee, what was the catalyst for him to become a devotee? Sri Narada has explained a few factors. One was the service to the Bhaktivedanta. As in more detail, is hearing Krishna Katha from the Bhaktivedantas. And in this verse, getting a message saying my connection is unstable. I hope you can still hear me quite well. So in this verse, one particular aspect of his service, which had a very powerful impact in his devotional life, is being described. And that is, he had the opportunity to take the remnants of these great souls. And simply by taking these remnants, he became cleansed of all sins. It says here, all of his sins were eradicated. He became completely purified. And the Lord became very attractive to him. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives some interesting statements. The first statement being, Srila Prabhupada talks about the principle of becoming infected. Just like in material life, if we come in the proximity and we have interaction with someone who's infected with a disease, then we are sure to also become infected. I think many of us have experienced recently of this COVID. If you go near a person who is COVID positive, if we touch something that has been touched by some person who is COVID positive, then we are likely to become infected. So Srila Prabhupada draws this parallel, but he says in a good sense. In bhakti, that same principle exists. If we associate closely, if we touch that which has been touched by the pure devotees, we will become infected with bhakti. You know, in normal life or ordinary life, this is something in the Bhakti Shastras that is emphasized, that we should not associate too closely with materialistic persons. Because it is said, every person, every soul, their consciousness emits or radiates for about a circumference about 5 meters. And when one is within that proximity, then their consciousness also starts to affect us. It is said a cow expands its consciousness for about 25 meters. Therefore, if one is near a cow and the cow is in the mode of goodness, we'll also become infected with the mode of goodness. Therefore, it is advised. You see, even in India, the sadhus, they are so careful, they will not even sit. They will not even sit on a seat that has been sat upon by a person who is not on the transcendental path. They would rather stand, or if they do sit, they will cover their seat with something else. Because this principle of infection, it's very subtle. It's very subtle. And many of us, due to circumstances in our daily life, we have to interact and we come into close proximity with so many people who are steeped in materialistic life. And although we may not realize it, although we may not perceive it, their consciousness affects us. Their consciousness affects us in many ways. So therefore, we have to insulate ourselves every day. And Srila Prabhupada said, by chanting a minimum of 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and following the principles of sadhana bhakti, we will keep ourselves insulated. But the converse is also true. And it works very, very much in our benefit. If we come in the proximity of the Mahatmas, the great souls, the great devotees, simply by being close to them, their bhakti shakti will also impact us. What to speak when we actually interact with them? Like in this case, Sri Narada is saying he managed to have the foodstuffs that were touched by the Bhaktivedantas. Now, this is something very important, and I want to share with you one verse from the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, which Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami writes in the Antya Lila. So let me share my screen. So in the Antya Lila, chapter 16, text number 16, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami writes, Bhakta Pada Dhuli Ara, Bhakta Pada Jal, Bhakta Bhukta Avashesha Tina Mahabhala. And the translation is, the dust of the feet of a devotee, and the remnants of food left by a devotee are three very powerful substances. You can still hear me all right, dear devotees? I'm getting a message, my connection is not very stable.
Yes, Prabhuji, we can.
Okay. Then it is said, by rendering service to these three, one attains the supreme goal of ecstatic love for Krishna. In all the revealed scriptures, this is loudly declared again and again. So what are the three substances that it's being said here? That if we come into contact, then the result is ecstatic love for Krishna. The dust from the lotus feet of the pure devotees, the water that has washed the lotus feet of the pure devotees, and the remnants of the food from the pure devotees. Therefore, Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj says, Tata Bhara Bhara Kahi Shuna Bhakta Gana Vishvasa Kariya Kara Etina Sevana. Therefore, my dear devotees, please hear from me, for I insist again and again, please keep faith in these three and render service to them without hesitation. Tina Haita Krishna Nama Preme Mera Ulasa Krishnera Prasada Tate Shakshi Kalidasa. From these three, one achieves the highest goal of life, ecstatic love of Krishna. This is the greatest mercy of Lord Krishna. The evidence is Kali himself. So Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami very powerfully enunciates the power and the glories of these three substances and how it can bring us ecstatic love for Krishna. And then he quotes the story of Kalidas. Kalidas was a very aristocratic person. Actually, he was the uncle of Raghunath Das Goswami. But Kalidas had one very amazing quality. He had implicit faith in the power of the remnants of the devotees of the Lord. And Kalidas, he was always giving and offering prasadam to devotees. And after he had offered prasadam to them, he would beg for their remnants. But it's the nature of the devotees. They don't consider themselves advanced. They don't give their remnants. So he would devise some tricks which he would get the remnants of the devotees of the Lord. And Kalidas, that was his main business, always trying to get the remnants of the food. And he had implicit faith, but simply by doing this, he would develop the ecstatic love for Lord Krishna. There was one particular incident mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. There was one Vaishnav. His name was Jadu Thakur. Jadu Thakur was a Grihastha, but he came from a so-called lower caste. And one day, this high caste aristocratic Kalidas went to the home of Jadu Thakur. And when he went to the home of Jadu Thakur, he very humbly bowed down, offered prayers, and offered some very beautiful mangoes to Jadu Thakur and his wife. And Jadu Thakur, being a humble Vaishnav, he was saying, please don't do like this, Kalidas. We are very low-born, low-caste people. You'll be contaminated by acting like this. But Kalidas said no. So Kalidas's desire in his heart was to get the remnants of Jadu and his wife. He has more faith that by taking this remnants. Anyway, Jadu Thakur ate the mangoes, and Kalidas begged for the remnants, but Jadu Thakur very blankly and straightforwardly said, this is absolute nonsense. I can't give you my remnants. So Kalidas pretended that he accepted this, and he went and hid. So after Jadu Thakur and his wife had eaten, they threw the peels and the seed away in a little dump. And Kalidas saw that, and he went there and he licked the peels, he licked the seed, and he was feeling great happiness. So this was the nature of Kalidas. Now Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had a policy. He would never allow anyone to touch his feet or bathe his feet. But one day, Kalidas came to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at the Jagannath temple. And then he approached Mahaprabhu. And he asked Mahaprabhu whether he can please bathe his feet. Now, the standard answer of Mahaprabhu would have been a categoric no. But Mahaprabhu was so pleased with Kalidas's faith in the remnants of the devotees that Mahaprabhu said, okay, you can do it. Not only that, he allowed Kalidas to bathe his feet and drink, and Kalidas was just drinking. Eventually Mahaprabhu just said, bas, enough now. I gave you enough extraordinary mercy, but that's enough. So what we learn from this pastime of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and in particular this pastime as enunciated by Sri Narad Muni himself, is the power of being able to take the remnants of devotees. But dear devotees, I want to also make one point. In our Krishna consciousness movement, sometimes we see junior devotees, they do this. They try to steal the remnants of other devotees. Actually, this is a very, very high principle, a very sacred principle. And one should not pretend and try to imitate these pastimes of Kalidas unless one has deep faith in the Vaishnava from whom one wants to take the dust or take the remnants. We should not make this a cheap principle. One should have, if one feels that one desires and one wants to get the remnants of the Vaishnavas, the prerequisite is we should have deep faith in that Vaishnava, that this Vaishnava is an exalted Vaishnava. We should have deep faith in their remnants. I will develop love for Krishna. So it is a very powerful principle, but it's also a very sacred principle that we need to be following. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in his commentary on this chapter, he talks about the glorification of this point. Now I want to tell you some stories, some very nice pastimes of Srila Prabhupada that again, explains this principle. And this is one story that was told. Sorry, just bear with me. I think I've got my WhatsApp here on and it's making a lot of noise. Okay. So, yeah, let me share this pastime. So this was told by Srila Shrutikirti Prabhu, Srila Prabhupada's servant. Some of you all may have already heard it, but it's such a relishable pastime that it's always worth hearing again. So once Srila Prabhupada was traveling from Mexico City to Caracas in South America. So Srila Prabhupada would sometimes carry prasadam with him, and he would take it in the plane. So on this particular occasion, his prasadam was puff rice mixed with peanuts. So Srila Prabhupada was taking this puff rice with peanuts, and he ate for about 10 minutes or so. And then he looked at the devotees and he said, okay, meaning now you can have the remnants. So Shrutikirti Prabhu explains how he gave half of the remnants to Paramahamsa and the other half he kept with him. But after a few minutes, the stewardess, she was walking up and down the aisle. And suddenly she sees this puff rice. And in a very uncharacteristic behavior, she simply, without even asking, she put her hand into the puff rice, she grabbed a handful and she put it into her mouth. And then she exclaimed, oh, this is wonderful. What is it? And Shrutikirti said, it's puff rice. She said, why are you eating this? And I said, we have our own diet and we're vegetarian. She said, oh, is there anything else I can get for you? I looked at Prabhupada and he looked at me and he said, hot milk. She said, fine. So after about 10 minutes, she came back with 3 plates. She left and turned to Prabhupada. And I said, Prabhupada, that's amazing, isn't it? Prabhupada said, no, women have a natural propensity to serve. Of course, I was thinking it was amazing that she took Prabhupada's Mahaprasadam right off its plate. Somehow or the other, she got what all of us were mad after, which was Prabhupada's remnants. So this is where the story does not stop, dear devotees. This is the really interesting part. So Shrutikirti Prabhu was telling the story in one class in, I think it was Brazil. So after during the class, he told the story. And after the class, one devotee boy came to Shrutikirti and he said, that's an amazing story. And he said, can I tell you a Sankirtan story? He said, yes. Then he explained that how he would go to the villages in the faraway villages in Brazil, and 4x4. So one day they were in the rainforest, really far from everywhere. And they did some Harinam, and then they began to go do book distribution door to door. Then he went to one house and he knocked on the door. And a woman answered, and he tried to distribute her book. But as soon as she saw him in a dhoti and a kurta, she invited him in. And when he went in, he started to see that there were pictures of Krishna on the wall, and she had an altar, she had deities, and he was so surprised. Then he said, "You're a devotee." And she said, "Yes, yes. Wonderful to see you here." And he said, "How did you become a devotee?" And she said, "Well, the first time I met devotees was when I met Prabhupada on an aeroplane. I was the stewardess." So this was the same woman. It was 10 years later from that time that she had taken the Mahaprasadam. Then when she met the devotees again and got a book, that was it. That was the beginning of her spiritual life. Just seeing what Prabhupada has it done is mind-boggling to understand how Prabhupada made devotees. And it goes on and on. Beautiful story. This is the story of not only the remnants, this is just the glance of a pure devotee. So this is a story told by Chavan Das. So he says that 52 years ago, his life changed forever. So he was part of the Coast Guard in the American Navy. And one day he was stationed aboard a Coast Guard cutter at Boston Harbor. And that was on September 17, 1965. And that was the day Srila Prabhupada, who was on board the Jaluduta, was about to dock and anchor at Constitution Wharf. And that was where this devotee who was part of the Navy, his Coast Guard was anchored. So he goes on to say, it is a maritime custom that when two ships pass, they offer a salute by lowering, then raising the ensign or flag at the stern of the ship. So I offered, so you can imagine, Srila Prabhupada's Jaladuta is coming, and this devotee is on the Coast Guard, and he sees the Jaladuta coming, and he lowers the flag, and then he raises the flag again, which is the custom when two ships pass each other. And he offered the American flag to Srila Prabhupada, Jaladuta, in the same tradition. And when I looked up, he says, I was looking directly at him, and he was looking directly at me. I was transfixed by his effulgence and stood frozen in time as the ship passed. He acknowledged the greeting by slightly raising his left hand. So Prabhupada this like this. I will never forget the moment. This is a picture of the original Jaladuta built in 1910 that Srila Prabhupada traveled on. Now, 52 years later, the wake of the ship will continue to flood the world with love. So he goes on to say, 6 years later, he met the devotees and he got initiated by Srila Prabhupada. And he says there, Prabhupada called me to his room. He asked me to read 2 verses from the Bhagavad Gita. He commented briefly, then ordered me to go to Africa to open centers and preach to the people. Srila Prabhupada gave Chavan sannyas, and Chavan preached extensively in Africa for many years. Just the glance of Srila Prabhupada made this devotee. So how are we doing for time? Oh, I've got another meeting at 8:45. So just a few other salient points. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about the stages from Shraddha to Prem. And elimination of all sins or obstacles on the path of devotional service, one can become attracted. And one can have steadiness, one can have perfect taste, one can have transcendental emotions. So Prabhupada is talking about anartha nivriti. Nishta means firmly fixed. removing the unwanted things, firmly fixed, ruchi, taste, ashakti, attachment, ecstatic emotions, which is bhava bhakti, and finally, love of Godhead. And Prabhupada says in the end, all of these stages developed by the association of pure devotees. And that is the purport to this verse. That is the power of the pure devotees of Lord Krishna. So I'll stop here. We may have about 6 minutes for any questions or comments that anyone may have. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanava Pranam, Yogeshwar Prad. Thank you for a wonderful class. And by the way, thank you for arranging the 3-day katha for Shri Radhika Raman. It was a wonderful session, really was very inspiring. So thank you for that. I'll make it quick. I know you have a meeting. I have a quick question. So you mentioned earlier Prabhupada's comments to one of the devotees about how Narad Muni, being a liberated soul, can remember his past lives. How do we reconcile the findings in the Gita where Krishna says to Arjun being a liberated soul, that you cannot remember your past lives, I can, being Paramatma. That seems at a diametric contrast, opposing contrast to what Prabhupada's comments are with Narad Muni. How do we reconcile that? How do we understand that?
I reconcile that with the verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, from me comes remembrance and forgetfulness. So I reconcile that by that verse, by the Lord. So if Krishna wants us to remember, he'll allow us to remember. And if he wants us to forget, he will make us forget. So it's all by the will of Krishna. Sometimes we remember, sometimes we don't.
Perfect answer, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments? We still have time. Let me see if in the chat box anyone's got. Hema Mataji, thank you for your comment. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for the wonderful class. It was very enlightening. I was just thinking about the remnants of food. How can we kind of understand it with scientific point of view? Like, in science, we should not eat other people's kind of. It's like, how do you say that? I mean, we are told not to, have the remnants actually in science if you think hygienically. So how do we understand that with spiritual? With spiritual, I can understand it's subtle, but still I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Spiritual principles, just by their nature, are above material principles, and spiritual activities, they transcend material understanding. But the general principle is what Srila Prabhupada said. Like, according to modern science, the reason why you should not eat other people's food is because they may have some infection and that'll be transmitted to you. Yes, that is the material principle. But the remnants of a pure devotee, that food is imbued with the potency of bhakti. Therefore, when one takes that food, one gets it. But one may also do not be fanatical about this. If an advanced devotee has got some disease, one cannot say, I will take that food and I will not contaminate. Prabhupada said, and there are some evidences where I can dig up. Prabhupada said we should not be fanatical. Both principles apply. Both principles apply. But in the remnants of a pure devotee, it's the spiritual principle that everything about that pure devotee is imbued with bhakti. Srila Prabhupada gives the example, if you take an iron rod and you put it in fire, and you hold it in fire, that iron rod, after some time, will take on the qualities of heat and light. It becomes spiritual. So in the same way, the devotee, the pure devotee, who are imbued with the qualities of Suddha Sattva, which is a combination of the Chit and the Ladini potency, they are completely colored by bhakti. So everything that they touch, or anything that you go even near close proximity, that bhakti that's invested in them will touch us. It's something we cannot rationalize on a material platform, because it's a spiritual platform. But the understanding as given by Srila Rupa Goswami, using the analogy of iron and fire, is that the pure devotee on the stage of Bhava Bhakti, who is on the platform of Shuddha Sattva, which is the energy of Ladini and Samvit potency. Everything about them is infested with that, and we will also, it'll be passed on to us. It'll be passed on to us.
Thank you very much for the enlightening answer, Prabhuji. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay. We shall end today's session. Thank you very much for your attendance and participation. All glories to your service. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vancha kalpa turubhyascha kripa sindhubhya cha.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank
you. Beautiful.
you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you for the lovely
Thank you,
class.
Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.